È brutto vedere gli anziani scartati.
Honoring the elderly, Pope Francis urges society to respect the dignity of those in their twilight years.
Obamacare back at the Supreme Court. I'm Jason Calvi. I'll have that story coming up.
Scathing reprimand. A Justice Department report suggests blatant targeting of minorities by Ferguson, Missouri police. And The Gift of Life. A new film shows the beauty of all lives, even those discarded by parents. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, March 4th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. The Supreme Court hears arguments today in a major legal test of the Affordable Care Act. The question being considered, are people in all 50 states eligible for federal tax credits under Obamacare? Challengers claim the way the law is written, only people who live in states that created health exchanges can actually receive those credits. Jason Calvi is at the Supreme Court with the story tonight. Jason.
Brian, the Affordable Care Act says certain people who buy their insurance on an exchange set up by the state qualify for tax credits. Now, the challengers here say only people in those states qualify, while the Obama administration says people in all 50 states do. They say if the Supreme Court rules against them, millions could lose their insurance.
This is a matter of life and death.
Martha Robinson and son Aiden live in Indiana, which doesn't have a state-run exchange. Aiden relies on federal subsidies to visit the doctor and get medicine for a serious genetic condition.
By 2014 January, we were finally able to get insurance, and I was finally able to go see doctors again.
Grateful to be
Today he joined others showing support for federal subsidies in the 34 states that didn't set up exchanges.
Because the legislative power.
But there are plenty of Americans who don't agree.
Doug and I are forced by the Internal Revenue Service to either buy insurance we don't want or face a tax penalty. We want Americans to have options.
Attorney Mike Carvin argued against this part of the health care law today. He points to 4 words in Obamacare, established by the state.
Congress wanted states to establish these exchanges. So the basic logic is that's why they limited subsidies only when states did establish it. If, as happened under the IRS rule, they got subsidies regardless of whether they established the exchanges, then quite predictably 2/3 of the states said no thanks, completely frustrating Congress's intent that all 50 states would have state-established exchanges.
The Obama administration says the words established by the state need to be read in the context of the whole law. It says the health care law provides for subsidies in all 50 states.
If we're in a situation where we undermine the exchanges, we can't be in a position of suggesting that people need to sign up for health insurance because they wouldn't be able to afford it.
The liberal-conservative divide was on display during the intense questioning today. Chief Justice John Roberts, who was a swing vote the first time Obamacare was here at the Supreme Court, was quiet today. We expect a decision in this case by the end of June. Brian?
Jason Calvi at the Supreme Court, thank you. Jonathan Keim is counsel at Judicial Crisis Network. We have Paige, Winfield, Cunningham covering health policy for the Washington Examiner. Jonathan, do you think the silence of Chief Justice Roberts is significant here?
It's hard to say. There was an organized campaign before the arguments by many on the left side of the political spectrum to try to influence Justice Roberts. If you may recall, in the last Obamacare case to make it to the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Roberts was reported to have switched his vote between the end of the oral argument and the issuance of the actual opinion. So apparently he took that matter to heart and was resolved to not make his opinions known, at least not clearly during the argument.
Do you think it'll come down to liberal justice versus conservative justices?
It very well may. However, it's still a little bit unclear how it's going to come out. It was closely divided, it seemed, among the justices who chose to ask questions. So, there are a lot of people speculating that various people, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kennedy potentially, might be in play.
Paige, this challenge really concerns language. So will it come down to really clarifying what the intent of Congress was when that language was placed in there?
Well, it's really two parts, kind of been two parts all along, and that is, A, what was the intent of Congress when passing it, and what does the language actually say? And you saw that reflected in the arguments today. The liberals on the court emphasized that what Congress intended and the overall purpose of the law. Justice Kagan in particular said that if you block these subsidies from the exchanges, now you have you basically lack an affordable product for people. You're not going to have customers shopping on the exchanges, and therefore the purpose of the law is going to be thwarted. But on the other side, on the textual part of it, you saw a lot of the more conservative justices, including Justice Kennedy, actually acknowledging that that may be on the side of the challengers, because when you read the law at its heart, what it seems to say is that the subsidies would not be allowed in the federal-run exchanges. You saw Scalia press that point quite a lot. And then he also went on to say if the court does rule, Congress can go ahead and change the language in the law if it wants to.
Is there a clear answer to that if it boils down to that language? Is there a clear-cut answer that they can arrive at?
I think there is. I mean, the language is plain, which is that the subsidies go to plans bought on exchanges established by the state. Usually when courts take a look at statutory language, what they're going to do is they're going to look at the parts that are clear, start with those, and then work through the other parts that may or may not be that clear. And in this case, the language that's actually at issue is very clear.
Paige, are there alternatives, viable alternatives being discussed if the challengers win this case?
We've seen a number of Republicans propose some ideas in the last couple of days. There have been some on the Senate side, also recently on the House side. Paul Ryan, in particular, is part of that. They haven't been the most specific plans. Basically, if Republicans have tried to say, we don't want to just immediately cut out these subsidies to all of these Americans, so we want to have at least some kind of intermediate plan to make sure that people are tided over, not all of a sudden losing out on this financial assistance. We haven't seen a lot of specifics, though. So I think that remains to be seen, what they end up, if they end up proposing any more specifics before or while we wait the decision.
It seems like a great opportunity for them. All right, Paige Cunningham and Jonathan Keim, thanks for joining us, both of you.
Glad to be here.
Thanks.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world.
The facts do not support the filing of criminal charges against Officer Darren Wilson in this case.
Attorney General
Michael
Eric
Brown's
Holder.
death, though a tragedy, did not involve prosecutable conduct on the part of Officer Wilson.
Eric Holder commenting this afternoon on a Justice Department report released today. That report concludes black citizens of Ferguson, Missouri are disproportionately subjected to excessive police force. That federal probe began after Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson shot and killed 18-year-old Michael Brown last summer. More now on the case from Suzanne LaFranchi.
Brian, the months-long investigation found sweeping patterns of racial bias by police officers in Ferguson. The report claims blacks were routinely discriminated against by a police department that used excessive force, issued petty citations, and made baseless traffic stops.
The U.S. Department of Justice found a pattern and practice of discrimination against African Americans by both the Ferguson Police Department and the city's municipal court. The investigation was sparked by the protests which followed the fatal shooting of Michael Brown by a white police officer.
You've seen the civil disobedience, you've seen the marches, you've seen the protests. This is the type of justice that people are talking about.
The Justice Department report says between 2012 and 2014, African Americans accounted for 85% of the traffic stops, 90% of the citations, and 93% of the arrests in Ferguson, even though African Americans only account for 67% of the population. But that apparent disparity may not tell the whole story.
And when you look at the surrounding municipalities around Ferguson, on one side you have Berkeley, which is over 80% African American. On the other side you have Jennings, which is over 90% African American. What we don't know is, in terms of the people who are stopped, where are they from?
More concerning, perhaps, is the evidence of racist jokes emailed by Ferguson police and court officials. Ferguson officials say they're reviewing the findings of the report. Whatever the specifics, the co-chairs of the Ferguson Commission say changes definitely need to be made.
We need to change training, we need to change assessment, we need to change the way in which we interact with our citizens.
As we have to take now what is publicly known to be a situation, come up with solutions, then execute whatever those solutions are, go back and measure the results, and then see if we made some progress from there.
Marie Kenyon, director of the Peace and Justice Commission for the Archdiocese of St. Louis, tells me the church believes the solution rests with strengthening families. She says the church's goal is to help families out of poverty, find jobs, and get a quality education. Brian?
All right, thank you, Suzanne. Alabama's Supreme Court rules in favor of marriage as the union of one man and one woman. That ruling directly opposes a federal judge's earlier decision declaring the state's ban on so-called same-sex marriage unconstitutional. Legal expert Mark Ayers says only the U.S. Supreme Court can really clear up confusion over the efforts to redefine marriage.
That's one of the very salient points made in the Alabama Supreme Court's decision when it's doing its own analysis, is it boils it down in many places to when you say marriage is a fundamental right, which is long recognized by the U.S. Supreme Court and by many others, and I think most people would say so. But what are you talking about?
Attorney Mark Ayers specializes in appellate litigation. Ukraine's parliament says at least 32 workers have died in a coal mine explosion in eastern Ukraine. The separatist rebels controlling that region claim there was only one death. The area has been the scene of battles between government troops and pro-Russian separatists. The rebels say the explosion was not caused by shelling, but by a volatile mixture of gas and air. At least 150 workers have been evacuated from that mine. Where the elderly are not honored, there is no future for the young. Pope Francis delivers this poignant message today during his catechesis devoted to the elderly. Speaking to the crowds in St. Peter's Square for his general audience, Francis denounced a lack of respect and consideration for the elderly and their dignity. He said often our societies not only fail to make room for the elderly, but even consider them a burden. This, he says, is sinful.
È brutto vedere gli anziani scartati. È cosa brutta, è peccato.
The Pope saying not taking care of the elderly is a nasty thing and a sin. Francis pointed out the church has always accompanied the elderly with gratitude and affection. Father Scott Borgman of the Pontifical Academy for Life joining us from Rome. And Father, the Academy is conducting a workshop right now on care for the elderly. What are your main concerns that you're addressing?
Well, Pope Francis says that Jesus came so that we might have life and have it more abundantly. And we want to emphasize that life right up to the end. The defense and protection of life, which is our purpose in the Pontifical Academy for Life. So we're bringing experts in from all over the world to look at different aspects of palliative care, which is basically care for the elderly. And we want to be able to treat human beings with dignity right up until their natural death.
What does the church teach about caring for the aged that we might be missing, that we may not know?
Well, we believe that every human life, or the church teaches that every human life is valuable. And regardless of how much they can contribute to society, even at the end of life, every life is valuable and has purpose and can contribute to the kingdom of God here on earth.
Pope Francis actually addressed this at his Wednesday audience, reminding us that every one of us, if we're lucky to live, will be elderly. He really has a passion for this issue, doesn't he?
Indeed. He gave a wonderful speech to grandparents, encouraging them. And what we want to do is take a look at different aspects of palliative care and how we as a church can reach out to institutions and help them to institute medical ethics, which would take better care of the aged. In fact, we see oftentimes in the media these things about euthanasia, about people wanting to avoid suffering, and yet in the Catholic faith we find a purpose to suffering. This is a really incredible thing, which we can't get into right now, but the purpose of suffering, and to be able to offer Catholic institutions, again, the possibility of caring for the aged. Because no one who has good palliative care, good end-of-life care, has ever asked for euthanasia.
For people who may have ethical questions in the care of their elderly relatives, is there a good resource for Catholics to get good answers?
I think in English, one of the best resources is the National Catholic Bioethics Center, and I can't do any don't want to do too much publicity, but if you go on their website, that's the NCBC, they have a lot of great articles on all of these topics.
Thank you for joining us from rainy Rome tonight.
It's a pleasure, Brian.
Coming up, jurors watch a video of the fatal explosion near the 2013 Boston Marathon finish line. And the Pope continues streamlining Vatican finances. We go to Rome for his latest step. From today's reading of the 20th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just so the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Thanks for joining us on Wednesday evening in the second week of Lent. I'm Brian Patrick. The lawyer for the Boston Marathon bombing suspect says her client did participate in the 2013 attacks. A federal jury faces a monumental task, deciding the fate of Johar Tsarnaev. The 12 jurors and 6 alternates hear opening statements today. Tsarnaev could face the death penalty for his alleged role in the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. A pair of homemade bombs exploded at the finish line of the marathon, killing 3 people and wounding more than 260. The FBI says the bombs were inside pressure cookers packed with pellets and nails. Police say Tsarnaev and his brother Tamerlan killed a police officer on the MIT campus. In the end, Tamerlan was killed. Johar was eventually caught. The 21-year-old has pleaded not guilty to 30 federal charges. Many of them carry the death penalty. The journey to opening arguments has not been smooth. The defense tried to have the case taken out of Boston. They also pushed to delay the trial following the terrorist attacks in Paris. The judge denied both requests. In the trial, defense attorneys are expected to paint Tsarnaev as a troubled young man, caught under the influence of an older brother who was bent on jihad. His defense lawyer, Judy Clark, is well known for getting high-profile clients life in prison rather than the death penalty. And Pope Francis meets today with bishops connected with the Focolare movement dedicated to unity and brotherhood. The Holy Father spoke about the theme of that group's meeting, the Eucharist as the center of unity. He encouraged these bishops to continue their work of ecumenical and interreligious dialogue. Some of the bishops are from Iraq, Syria, and Ukraine, and Francis offered them special words of support. The Vatican has opened the cause of sainthood for Focolare's founder, Chiara Lubich. Let's go to Rome, where Alan Holdren is standing in the rain in front of the Vatican. And Alan, what can you tell us about the threats that have been made by ISIS against the Vatican? What do you hear there in Rome?
Well, obviously, ISIS has said that Rome is next. What's not clear to any one of us here in Rome is whether or not they're talking about this city or they're talking about the Western world. Here at the Vatican, they have upped security. It's more difficult to get in today than it was 6 months ago, and that's got to be for the ISIS threat.
Also, Pope Francis has implemented some reforms, and what are they meant to address?
They're addressing the way that money is managed and also property is managed within the Holy See. This is the interplay between different departments. One of them is headed by Cardinal George Pell of Australia. He was brought here to Rome from Australia to head up this department that's meant to oversee the way this money is managed. And he's ruffled a few feathers in the process. The Pope has given him this mandate. This legal framework that was announced this week will help him as he tries to effect the change the Pope wants to see.
We may see a couple of new saints before too long. The parents of the little flower, Saint Therese of Lisieux. When will that canonization be, and what do we know about this couple?
Well, the head of the Vatican Saints Department announced just informally to journalists this last week that the parents of Saint Therese would be canonized during October's Synod for the Family, an appropriate time to canonize them as the first ever married couple to be canonized together. Now, they were obviously the mother and father of Saint Therese of Lisieux. They were also the parents of another 8 children. 5 of them survived through infancy. They brought up their family in prayer in the home, and they also often invited the poor into the family, into the home, to eat with them. So they're praising these two as models of holiness in the family.
So that canonization comes at a very special time as the Pope focuses on the family. He is coming, of course, to the United States for the World Meeting of Families. Have we heard any more about his plans?
About his plans for going to the United States, I know that there are many offers on the table. Nothing has been finalized as far as his final schedule goes. I know there are a lot of people that want to see him, and that's being heard here in the Vatican as well. We just heard this week of a proposal from a group of Jews in the United States that would like him to come visit them on the 50th anniversary of the Vatican Council's document on how the Catholic Church speaks and dialogues with other religions. So that's something that we may be able to look forward to as part of this trip.
It will be a busy trip for the Holy Father come September. Alan Holdren from Rome, thanks for joining us tonight, Alan.
Thank you, Brian.
On this Wednesday, the 4th of March, we're very grateful you can join us tonight and each night here on EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. A Christian pastor provides refuge to hundreds of abandoned babies on the streets of South Korea. Lee Jong-rak has helped more than 500 babies with his baby box. That's a bin where mothers can safely leave their newborns. Hundreds of babies are abandoned in South Korea because of stigmas surrounding single motherhood and children with disabilities. Filmmaker Brian Ivy captured Pastor Lee's work in his documentary called The Dropbox. It's in theaters today and tomorrow. Catherine Szeltner spoke with Ivy earlier today.
Brian, you traveled all the way to Korea to film Pastor Lee and his ministry. What motivated you to make this film?
Well, I really wanted to be famous, just like a lot of film school students and a lot of kids who wanted to make movies since they were 9 years old. I wanted to be famous like all my heroes. I wanted to travel the world, and I wanted to hear the applause and people come into the world, so I'd fashion for them and stuff. So I really saw a story that was a golden ticket to Sundance Film Festival. But obviously that motivation got turned upside down, inside out when I actually got to Korea.
So what kind of personal impact did making the film have on you from behind the camera lens?
Well, the personal impact on me, honestly, to make a long story short, is I became a Christian while making this film. I actually came to the realization that I needed to be saved. The worst mistake I ever made, I told a little kid once when he asked, I said, the worst mistake I ever made was thinking I was too good to need God's forgiveness. And I don't think that anymore.
Brian, this movie is about abandoned babies. If families can't adopt them, what can they do?
Well, families can wrap around those families. People can wrap around those families. If you can cook, if you can clean, if you can babysit, that's important. If you can open up a spare room for a mother in crisis and embrace her difficulty, that's what we're calling people to do in their own neighborhoods.
The documentary is out today and tomorrow. What do you hope people take away from this film?
Well, what I hope they see beyond the earthly picture of this man in Korea doing this rescuing children is I hope they see God in us. I hope they see the Dropbox is the place we find ourselves, bound up in the dark, helpless, needing to be saved, pulled out of this darkness by a father into the light, into a home forever.
Brian Ivy, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, all the way from Los Angeles. Thank you.
Nope. Hey, it's my honor. Thank you.
Wow, what a well-spoken young man. Thank you, Catherine. Until tomorrow, we hope you will like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. If you'd like to watch again, you can go to EWTN's YouTube page. Visit EWTN.com for all sorts of wonderful information, and we encourage you to download the EWTN app to your handheld device. It's a great way to watch EWTN News Nightly and all of EWTN's quality Catholic programming. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Tonight, we'll leave you with these moments from the Pope's general audience at St. Peter's Square. Good night, and may God bless you.